morning, and thank you so much for having me, and that was a very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I've had a wonderful couple of days in Sydney, and it's gone so quickly. I just don't even know what to think. Today I want to talk to you about future-proofing the boardroom, particularly because we are living in very unusual times. There's so much going on, and the boardroom is under more scrutiny than ever before because we know that strong boards help build strong companies, and strong companies contribute to strong economies. So if you look in the press, we're seeing more about boards than we've ever seen before, and rightly so. When you picture in your mind what the boardroom is, I think for a lot of us, we think of a sort of King Arthur in the Round Table room. You know, this sort of, you walk into a room, it's paneled in wood, you have King Arthur and his wise knights, you know, all of these men, mostly men, sitting around a table, and they go into the room and the doors close with a whoosh, and they sit down and you think they're having wise discussions and having wise conversation and thinking chivalrous thoughts and thinking about how they can improve the world and improve the company for the better of everybody, and that they're speaking in a sort of thee and thou language, and then they leave the boardroom and go forth into the world and bring greatness to the world. Well, some of that is true. We do speak a sort of funny thee and thou language in the boardroom. The rest of it is not always the case. But actually, I believe very strongly that it should be something we should aspire to. We should be having wise conversations. We should be holding ourselves to a sort of chivalrous standard. We should be trying to do these things because the boardroom has a lot of power. And there's a lot going on in that room, more than ever before. And one of the things that I think we need to think about as well is, if you're not sure what a boardroom does, you also need to realize that most of us sit on boards. If you sit on a community board, or if you're on your neighborhood watch board, or if you are on your kids' school governor's committee, or if you're in your co-op board, all of these things are actually boards. If you at university participated in some sort of editorial board, all of these are boards. And what happens in those rooms, in the boardrooms of nonprofit organizations, early stage companies, large companies, it's actually in many ways the same. The principles behind it are universal, and the expectations to which we should hold ourselves are universal. The dynamics are fairly universal. We find in almost every boardroom the annoying person, the one who asks lots of annoying questions without much reason, the one who actually is very conscientious and reads all the papers, the one who's not conscientious and doesn't read any of the papers. You know, the people that we see, the characters in that play, are often the same in any kind of boardroom context. It is also one of the most hierarchical rooms in the world, where the chair sets the tone. I could chair a group of people. My speaker buddy could chair a group of people. They could be the same people, but the outcome would probably be different, because of the way that the dynamic of the room goes. What's really important, though, in future-proofing the boardroom is actually the discussions that we have and how we balance those discussions. Within the boardroom, we have discussions that are what I call grounding and stargazing. Grounding are the sort of tick-boxy, tactical things, the corporate governance-y things that we think of, you know, the legal issues, the accounting and auditing, you know, things that you think of as boardroom issues. There's also the stargazing side, which is about looking way into the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into the future, challenging the organization and making sure that we're asking the questions that we should be asking. Now, some boardrooms tend to err on the side of the tick-boxy side. And you know, they read the papers, they vote, they make sure that they're doing everything correct, and then they leave. Some boardrooms tend to focus too much on the stargazy side because the tick-boxy side is not so much fun. So it's much more fun to talk about the future, what's happening long-term. You know, it's something that's unrelated to today. It's just more fun to have that discussion. But actually, we need to get the balance right and make sure that we're having both discussions. And so you've got to do one and the other. But the discussions that we're having, the agendas have changed over time. And so things that we used to talk about, we still talk about, but now we have added discussions that maybe we haven't had in the past. So I want to talk about 5 areas that we need to to update in our discussions in the boardroom and make sure that we're talking about the right things so that we are future-proofing the organization, because that's what it's really about. The first is about infrastructure. The second is about technology. The third is about internationalization. The fourth is about communication. And the fifth is actually about balancing continuity and change. So making sure that for all the future-proofing we're doing, we're not out future-proofing ourselves so that we're forgetting who we were and all the good stuff that existed. So infrastructure is the first. All of our organizations, we're living in times where we might have old buildings that we exist in, old rolling stock, lots of old stuff that we're existing within, and yet we need to make sure that we're integrating ourselves into an effective, low-carbon sort of economy. And so we need to think about energy consumption, we need to think about integrating clean tech and sustainability, and we need to make sure that we're looking at all facets of the business, from building stock and rolling stock to changing work patterns. And there's been a whole discussion about, should we be working from home, should we not be working from home, should we hop on a plane to get somewhere? I flew all the way from the UK to get here for this talk. Last week I was in Munich, Madrid, Frankfurt. I came here, I'm going to Melbourne. Next week I'm going to, where am I going now? Back to the UK, might have to go to Berlin. I'll go to Rome for a board meeting. That's not terribly green of me. And the question is, how do we balance, could I have done this talk as effectively if I had been back in the UK and done it over Skype? Would that have worked as well? Or do I need to be here with you in order to have this FaceTime together? Well, there's some balance to that as well. Do we need to be always getting on a plane, or can we stay home for some things? And there is that discussion about, for board members, do you need to be sitting in the boardroom, or for some of the board meetings, can you be having a telepresence? There's a balance of that as well. You do need to have that fingertip feel, so you need to be around. The second thing is technology. We've had a lot of discussion around technology here at Amplified, so you don't need me to start fresh with technology. But one of the things that I do think we need to think about, and particularly in very traditional boardrooms, is that technology is at the heart of a lot of the things that we do. And it is changing every business, no matter what the business, even the most traditional business is being affected in some way by technology. In order for this potential to be fulfilled, boards need to be up to speed on what's going on. And for a lot of us who maybe have been in the boardroom for many years, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world of technology that we might not be aware of. And so part of our responsibility as board members is constant education and constant re-education, so that we're constantly up to speed on what's happening and we understand how that impacts our business. And that is our job as individual directors, but it's also the job of the organization to make sure that we are being refreshed as well. There are things like social media, big data, cloud computing. Each comes with opportunity and risk. And we need to be able to understand what those are, because we have to take decisions. We're deciding, can the money be allocated in the end? You want to make sure that your board members know what they're doing. And board members need to be also making sure that we're challenging the organization, and we need to understand these issues so that we can say, what's your social media strategy? I can tell you for most organizations, if a board member said, what's your social media strategy, they'd be pretty surprised. So the other thing is internationalization. So regardless of a company's main business, even if you're based in Sydney, you only work in Sydney, you don't work anywhere else, you still are impacted by what's happening in the outside world. So there's no company that can afford to be completely inwardly focused. We are politically, socially, and economically more interconnected than we've ever been before. My child has more in common with a child from Australia of the same generation, or a child from Japan, or a child from somewhere in Africa, than he probably does with me. Because of technology and because of communication and because of the globalization of all kinds of cultural things, he understands they all watch Ben 10, or they all have something else that they watch. I don't watch TV very much, but they all play the same games, they all download the same things, they listen to the same music, so they have something in common with one another. It's very important for us to understand the impact of internationalization. And by the way, As board members, we need to be setting the example as well, and that means that our boardrooms, when we think about who's sitting around the table, we need to have an international composition for our boardrooms as well. Even if your business is only based in Australia, even if your business is only based in Sydney, even if it's local, you need to make sure that you're getting an understanding of what's happening on the outside of the world. Now, the one thing I have to give credit to Australians is that you, with New Zealanders, are some of the most well-traveled people I've ever met. And that is fantastic, because almost every single person that I've met has traveled or lived somewhere else in the world. And that is, you won't find that in the US necessarily. You won't even find that across Europe. A lot of Europeans will travel within Europe, but might not travel outside. And so that actually is an enormous advantage that you bring, because you're able to bring a lot of experiences you've had somewhere else back home again, and also share your experiences with the outside world. But you need to also have those experiences sitting around your boardroom and within your executive ranks. It's very important. And to be able to also send your people out to have other experiences. The next thing is about communication. No corporate board will be able to implement its modern agenda without effective and dynamic communication, both with its stakeholders, its customers, its investors, its staff, and also inside the boardroom. Within the boardroom, my responsibility as a non-executive director primarily is to ask hard questions. I am supposed to be the one who says, I hear what you're saying, I'm just not sure that it might work that way. Or I hear what you're saying, can you tell me what other things you've explored? Or that sounds good, but could you take it a little bit farther? It's almost like being a parent. You know, my son comes home and says, I can't do math, I don't know how to do multiplication tables or something, and I'll say, you can, let's work on it. And I set the bar just a little bit higher than his comfort level to make sure that he gets where he needs to go. That's part of my responsibility. You love them enough to actually push them harder than they ever thought they could go. And that means that within the boardroom, we need to be communicating effectively with one another. Even when we're disagreeing, we're moving forward. And then when it comes time for communicating outside, we need to make sure that we have a really great strategy for communication and marketing of our ideas, and that we're clear and concise. Once we take a decision about where the direction of the company is going, we need to make sure that other people know that. That means also doing things that feel very risky to us, like using social media. We live in a time where we can't completely control the message the way we used to. If you think about BP and the oil spill, BP was used to talking BP to Kremlin, BP to White House, talking to the press, controlling the message much more. They were completely surprised by the fact that there was an entire world of people having a conversation on Twitter and Facebook that not only did they know nothing about, but they had no control over. And because they weren't participating, they also weren't even able to get in there and move the conversation or respond to the conversation. And it came as a complete surprise to them. It's one of the reasons that I love social media so much. To me, it is a very powerful medium for spreading ideas and for getting ideas. And you must, when you're using social media, be both on send and receive. So companies that think that they could just go out and tell people what they want to tell them are mistaken. And just by one thought, I was sitting at a dinner recently with somebody who's the head of a very large multinational retail organization. He's the chairman of the organization. And I hesitate to bring up stuff like Twitter in a context of board members, because they look at you like, kidding me? And so I said to him, yeah, we're sitting at dinner, and I said, have you ever used Twitter? And he said, it's something for my grandchildren. I don't know what to do with Twitter. And I said, you know what would be funny? Let's just take a look and see what, if we search on Twitter for your company name, what people are talking about. So I put in the name of the company, and he turned a funny shade of puce because there was a whole conversation going on about his company that he knew nothing about. Now, why he didn't know about it was because he himself didn't have a presence there, but also his organization wasn't telling him what was going on there, probably because they knew that he had a sort of jaundiced view of Twitter as well. So they didn't want to bring it up necessarily either, because they thought, oh, well, he's just going to poo-poo it. So I said, it would be funny. Let's put your name in the search engine and see what comes up. Type in his name. I really thought we would have to call the paramedics. He seemed to have the idea that if he wasn't on there, like when your kid is 4 and they go, you can't see me, that if he's not on there, no one's talking about him. It doesn't work that way. The conversation goes on with or without you. And so it's very important as a board director as well to understand what's going on. So a lot of board directors don't even have something like a Google alert. You know, that's like the minimum, you know. So we get the papers that are fed to us from the company and the information that's fed to us from the company, and we figure that we know everything we need to know. It's simply not good enough. We need to have our finger on the pulse of what's going on and what the world thinks, because also part of my responsibility as a non-executive is not to just listen to what the company's telling me, but also to have my own opinion about the company. That's what makes me an independent non-executive director. And so we need to make sure that we have our finger on the pulse of what's going on, and there are lots of mechanisms for doing that. But for a lot of, you know, to those of us in the room who are not in the boardroom, this all sounds pretty standard stuff, right? But actually, for people in the boardroom, we live a pretty cosseted life, you know, and people tell us things and tell us what we need to know. We need to be much harder on ourselves and much more actively engaged. The last of the 5 things that I think is important is balancing continuity and change. There is a role around the board table for a keeper of the flame, to understand the origins of the company, where the company comes from, what its true north is, and to make sure that no matter what the company does, it always remembers what it is, and that it's always balancing itself against, if we make this change, what will that mean to our past, and what does that mean to our future? So for all this talk about newfangled stuff and, you know, trendy things and the flavor of the month, and we need to have an entirely new technology system, we have to get rid of the entirely old one and move into the entirely new one, there also is a place, and I say that as someone who's quite forward-thinking, but there is a place for, wait a second, that sounds really cool, but is that actually the best thing that we could possibly be doing for our company? So that balance of continuity and change, of innovation, fantastic, but it also has to be driven by a real business need and a real understanding that if you put it in place, you're not constantly replacing systems, which is great for a lot of the large software companies. And having worked for one many years ago, we love it when you replace your system, and then you replace your system, and then you replace your system, and then you have to integrate it with your legacy system and integrate, you know, that makes me a lot of money if I'm working in a software company, but if you're running a company, that ain't so good. We need consistency, we need stability, we also need change and innovation, and that balance is important. So the modern boardroom agenda doesn't disregard the old issues. It finds a way of being driven by the new stuff and the old stuff. And the way we do that, one of the most important ways we do that, is having diversity around the board table. And when I talk about diversity around the board table, your mind, I can tell from looking at you, automatically goes to women around the board table. And you know I'm a big fan of women around the board table because I'm one of them. And I do believe that's important. But when I'm talking about diversity here, I'm talking about diversity of thought, of idea, of experience, international diversity, age diversity. We can't have an entire boardroom filled with 6 Scottish accountants. 1, fine. 2, okay. 6, not so useful. You also can't have a boardroom full of people like me, because it would be a lovely conversation. I would find it very comfortable. But actually, that's not what I'm there to do. I'm there to challenge and be challenged, and to help build as robust an organization as I possibly can. And in order to do that, we need to have robust discussions, because if we're not having those discussions in the boardroom and challenging ourselves and the organization in the boardroom, and we're saying, hey, you're doing great, everything's great, see you later, that discussion will happen outside of the boardroom. It's our responsibility to actually have that conflict, that difficulty, that sort of sand in the oyster in that room, so that actually we're as robust and strong and future-proofed as we can be outside of the room. There are 1,000 other things I want to talk to, but I know my speaker buddy has a lot of good questions to ask. So I'll leave it there, but I think one of the things that I would say is, for those in the room who are board members, we need to work a lot harder. We really do. We need to ask more of ourselves and of the other people around the table. We need to be more demanding of ourselves. We need to spend more time in the boardroom and also with the organization than we probably do. We also need to make sure that the people around the table are holding their own, reading their board papers. We get reams and reams of them. You know, I have a board meeting come up. I've got this much to read in the next week. But that's why they pay me. That's called my job. And also, if we have board members who are sitting around the table who are not doing their job, they should be let go. Kindly name a boardroom after them or something and escort them out the door. There are different ways of doing it, kindly and nicely. But if they're not actually holding their own, there are the boardroom is not that big. There aren't that many spaces to fill in. You need to make sure that every single person around the table is adding something to the room. And as the organization moves on, when you brought someone on to do one thing, the organization might have moved on and you need someone else to take that chair. Everybody needs to understand that, and it's all about the organization. And the last image I would leave you with is this. When you think about what happens in the boardroom, and chief executives, executives of any company, anybody who works for a company, we need to think differently about what our role there is. These companies, they don't belong to us. Even the founders of organizations, they're not ours. If you think of it like, in England, we have families who pass estates from generation to generation. If you think of a company that way, my job when I join the company is to make it the best company it can possibly be, and then go. And leave it in better shape than when I came. I'm not irreplaceable. I hope I add some value, and then I go. The same thing for founders, the same thing for other board members, the same for chief executives. You can't go and come back, go and come back, go and come back. And you can't stay and stay and stay and stay. In order for organizations to grow and flourish and be modern, we need to have some turnover. And they are not ours. We are just visitors doing the best we can to help build strong organizations. And then we move on and leave them in the capable hands of other people. Hopefully we've done a good enough job of picking the next people and building a succession plan. And those people who are not in the boardroom, those who are investors, those who are employees and partners, you need to be holding your boardrooms to higher account. You need to know who's in your boardroom. You need to make sure that they're doing their job. You need to watch them carefully. And if you feel something is not right, there are lots of ways of expressing yourself, including social media. And we need to be making sure that, for the sake of all of us, for strong economies and for a stronger future, that we're all doing the job that we are all supposed to be doing. So I leave you with that, and we move on to questions. Thank you so much.